What's going on, guys? My name is Matt and I'm back with a new PC build for you guys. This is a computer I put together for under $50, but don't let its price fool you. This PC is rocking a quad-core CPU, ample RAM, and a beefy dedicated graphics card. And believe it or not, this thing can actually game. So let's talk about why I put this PC together. Well, the goal of this system was to put together a gaming PC for extremely cheap using some of the best deals I've ever found. Something I've talked about a lot in the past is that if you're wanting to build a gaming PC for as cheap as possible, your best bet is to buy an older OEM PC like an HP or Dell and upgrade it to fit your needs. I'm a man of my word, and that's why I use this exact method on this build. The base system I purchased to upgrade is the Dell T3400. I watched eBay listings for a while and came across this T3400, which on auction ended at just under $12. What made this deal really incredible is the fact this eBay listing was in my area, meaning I could use eBay's local pickup option to avoid what would have probably been $20 or more on top of the $12 just for shipping. This was a lifesaver and was part of the reason I was able to get the price down to so cheap. So what did my $12 get me? Well, it got me the Dell T3400 workstation, which originally released over 10 years ago in 2007. This system came complete with a Core 2 Duo E8400 CPU, which like the name implies is a dual-core CPU running at up to 3 GHz. Though at the time of release, 2 cores and 2 threads was enough, in early 2018, even most entry-level systems have 4 threads. For these reasons, I knew this was definitely a part I wanted to upgrade. For RAM, the system came with 3 GB of DDR2. Again, for 2007, this was more than enough, but in 2018, this is another area that needed a definite upgrade. These parts are sitting in the proprietary Dell motherboard, and the CPU is being cooled by this huge hunk of aluminum. In terms of graphics, this PC came with a really old and crappy workstation GPU, which is really only adequate for the most basic tasks today. For drives, the T3400 came with a 160GB 7200 RPM mechanical hard drive, which while not ideal was plenty of space for the OS and all of the games tested. Also, this Dell came with a disk drive and even a floppy drive, which is another testament to how old it is. Powering this system is a surprisingly adequate 500 watt Dell branded power supply. Now, while I wouldn't want this thing powering my personal PC, for this system it should work perfectly fine, and even has dual 6-pin PCIe power connectors, which is not something you usually see on these pre-built PCs. All of these parts are wrapped up inside of the big and heavy Dell Optiplex case, complete with a toolless side panel, something I'd like to see more of from manufacturers of modern computer cases. So now let's talk about the upgrades I made to this PC to get it to the point it is right now. The first thing I upgraded was the CPU. I purchased a Core 2 Quad Q8200 for $10. This is a quad-core CPU running at 2.3 GHz. Looking back at the system, this is really the only place I regret not searching longer for a better part. While the 2 extra cores over the Core 2 Duo are a much needed upgrade, dropping down to 2.3 GHz did seem to hurt us in less multi-threaded games and applications. Ideally, I would have dropped in something like a Q9650, which is 4 cores at 3 GHz and is actually something I may still do in the future just to see the performance difference. To upgrade the CPU in the system, it was a pretty simple process. I just removed the cables running across the heatsink shroud and unscrewed the heatsink. Tilting it up and out revealed the old Core 2 Duo. I removed this and replaced it with the Core 2 Quad and a fresh application of thermal paste. After cleaning the heatsink, I reinstalled it and boom, the CPU was upgraded. The next thing I upgraded was the RAM. I went from 3 to 6 GB of DDR2 by purchasing 3 GB from Craigslist for only $5. This was a pretty good deal and a lucky find, as DDR2 is pretty old at this point and sometimes hard to come by. Installing the 2 new sticks was as easy as opening the RAM retention clips at the end of the DIMMs and pushing the 2 new RAM sticks into place. Going to 6 GB of RAM was a pretty important upgrade, as 3 GB of RAM would not have been nearly enough for a few of the games tested. Finally, the last major part upgraded was the GPU. After doing some research and searching on eBay, what I ended up getting was an HD 6950 1GB for only $22 on auction. Released in 2010 as a mid to high-end GPU, this card still has enough power for a lot of modern games, with the only real downside of the one I picked up being its 1GB of video memory, making it unusable in some modern titles. I would have went with the 2GB version, but all the ones I found at the time of searching were out of budget, so this would have to do. Because this card is so old, I decided it would be a good idea to clean it up and change the thermal paste. I started by blowing air through it to remove dust, then brought it back inside to replace the thermal paste. This was actually my first time replacing thermal paste on a graphics card, and honestly it was surprisingly easy. All I had to do was remove the 4 screws on the back of the GPU and disconnect the fan wire from the PCB. This left me with the PCB and cooler detached from one another. I cleaned off both the cooler and the GPU die itself, then reapplied thermal paste to the GPU using the credit card method to make sure it was evenly applied across the entire GPU die. I'm glad I did this as the pre-applied thermal paste was very old and dry, meaning the GPU probably would have run hotter and louder. I then just reinstalled the cooler and the GPU worked great. To install the GPU into the PC itself, it was as easy as opening the PCIe slot lock and sliding the card into place. I then plugged in the 2 6-pin PCIe power connectors from the power supply into the GPU. Once this was done, the system was complete and ready for an operating system and games. For the OS, I just use unactivated Windows 10, which is free and you can run it indefinitely. I even made a video about this, which I'll link in the description and card above. Once the OS was up and running, I installed some games to test. Being that this hardware is old and cheap, I really wasn't sure of what titles this would be able to run, so I decided to run 4 games which are all popular and have different system requirements. I tested all of these games at 1080p low settings. Obviously dropping the resolution to 720 probably would have yielded higher frame rates in some of these games, but I kept all of them at 1080p for the point of consistency. The first game I tested was Rocket League, a popular title where you play soccer as cars. At 1080p low settings, the system did surprisingly well, pumping out 131 FPS average with 1% lows of 85. This honestly surprised me that this PC was able to get the average FPS up so high for this game. The next game I tested was CSGO, and honestly this was a disappointment. With an average of 53 FPS and 1% lows of just 41, this really wasn't a great experience and was surprisingly low for how well CSGO usually runs on these low-end systems. If you guys think you know what was causing the low FPS in CSGO, let me know in the comment section down below. After this, my hopes weren't super high for other games, but I decided to push on and test a few other games. The next game I tested was Overwatch, a pretty new game which is one of the harder esports titles to run. Again, at 1080p low settings, the system actually provided a playable experience with an average of 36 FPS and 1% lows of 26. This definitely wasn't that enjoyable, but it was playable for some casual matches. The final game I tested for fun was Fortnite Battle Royale. This is a really new title and one of my favorite games out right now. At 1080p low settings, Fortnite surprised me, giving an average of 42 FPS with 1% lows of 33. This was surprisingly playable, especially for how new of a title it is. For a $50 system, I'm pretty happy with the performance, but think this computer's biggest weakness is definitely the CPU's slow clock speed. I may make a follow-up video where I upgrade the system with a better CPU and see the performance difference, so if you guys would be interested in that, let me know in the comment section down below. Overall, the system's packing some pretty impressive specs for only $50, and in many lighter titles, it seems to work perfectly fine. If you guys would have done something different part selection wise, let me know in the comment section down below. So yeah guys, I think this wraps this video up. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up, as well as consider subscribing for more PC and tech related content in the future. And as always, this is Matt from Tech by Matt, signing out.